Oh, hello, come in. Come in, come away in. Hi, nice to see you. Thanks for calling around again. Let me just shut the door too. Have a seat. Have a glass. There's a Penderyn here. It's amazing Welsh whiskey. There's a little drop left for you there. So, good to see you again. Now, you mentioned last time that it was a bit of an abrupt ending. I had you there. I was reading a passage from my new cycle about the Grail poems, and we heard how Lancelot came, as it were, before his time to the Grail Castle, and how his chivalry overcame his piety, as it were. He stepped across her threshold he shouldn't have crossed because he thought he could help the priest, who seemed to be holding the weight of a young man. Of course, it's Christ in the sacrament, but he doesn't understand that. And then he steps into the Holy of Holies, and he's not ready for it yet and he falls into a swoon. That's where we left it. Because, of course, Lancelot, wonderful, the greatest knight, as far as worldly or this worldly, within our own time frame, ideals of chivalry, Lancelot, in a sense, represents a kind of perfection. But it's not quite enough all by itself. And, of course, his mind is divided because in his inside he's deeply in love with Guinevere, who is married to Arthur, who is, literally, as the cliched songs say, the wife of his best friend. It's a very old story. And, of course, he tries to deal with that temptation in various ways. And one of the ways is to go off on a pilgrimage and a knight errantry and off an adventure. And, of course, then he strays as a young man into the very Grail Castle in which we found him when you last visited. And under an enchantment, the wounded king's daughter, Peleus, appears to him as Guinevere. And from his perspective, he sins a sin. He sins the very sin he'd travelled to avoid. But there, in the midst of that moment of fall, by the sheer grace of God, because God, where sin works, grace abounds even more, the Grail Knight, Galahad, is conceived. And the earlier story has told us how it's gradually revealed to Lancelot that Galahad is his son, and that the one who really will achieve the Grail is the fruit of his body and Elaine's. But of course it's tragic for Elaine. And a little bit of backstory before where we started before, of course, the beautiful boat that he magically arrives at the Grail Castle in the beginning of the last episode is left to him by Elaine, who's died really of grief, of heartbreak, for love for Lancelot and love for her son, who's been divided from her and has gone off on quests. So it's no wonder, in a way, that when he steps into the Holy of Holies, Lancelot isn't ready for it and he swoons. But that gives you a bit of background, because in the little episode, it's not very so long as the last, that I'm going to read you, that brings to the end of the section called the Grail Castle. We'll see what becomes of Lancelot and the conversation he has. So, you may remember the last verse I read you was, "But take him to a chamber near and lay him soft in bed. Perhaps the morrow morn will show what in this night we cannot know, if his soul stays or strains to go, if he's alive or dead." So now we'll begin the last section, just to bring you to the end of this episode. "But on the morrow morn they found he still lay in a trance. But they sent word, if any might within that castle know this knight, dying it seemed of too much light, sent by some strange mischance. 3 days he lay in that deep trance, but on the third he woke. At first he could not bear the light that shone on him through windows wide, but he saw, set by his bedside, resting upon a couch full wide, a wounded man who wept and sighed. And then at last he spoke." And of course, the wounded man is the father of Elaine, the grandfather of Galahad. So then at last he spoke. "Good Lancelot, I know you well, and joy to see you wake. For you have slept 3 nights and days, meandering in trance's maze, but we have watched by you always and worried for your sake. And Lancelot sat up and spoke, Ah, now my sight grows clear. I know your face, so lined with pain, from that deep wound which was your bane. King Pelles, in this hall you reign. You are the father of Elaine, whom we both hold most dear. I am that king, although for now I lay aside my crown. I wait with all my people here, the coming of that night most fair, in whom our true Lord shines most clear, the coming of your son. Alas, said Lancelot, I fear that he has been waylaid. I thought, I hoped, I half believed he had been here, the Grail achieved. Alas, my hopes have been deceived. I fear I too have been bereaved, and in some grave he's laid. Fear not, said good King Pelles then, his time is still to come. But he must cross the wasteland fell, by withered tree and poisoned well, for he alone can break the spell, with what adventures who can tell? But I believe and trust full well he will find his way home. But tell me of my fair Elaine, who from my court did ride, and took with her young Galahad, alas, when he was still a lad, by Nacian's counsel, through the wood they rode out side by side. I know now that you knighted him, that to the court he came, and gathered every earthly knight to witness more than earthly light, for Camelot was all alight with Pentecostal flame. But more than this I cannot tell. Alas, she came not home. I know the sisters cared for her, but I've had no word from there. I keep her daily in my prayer, wherever she may roam. Alas, she roams no more on earth, said Lancelot, and sighed. She grieved for me and for her son, too long a grief when day is done. And on the river, 'neath the moon, she took a strange boat, pale and wan, and sang, most like a dying swan, and in her song she died. It breaks my heart to bring such news, but she has sent me here. She drew me to her magic boat, that I, like her, might sleep and float, to come and tell you of her fate. It was her dying prayer. She bid me say she loved you dear, and asks of you your prayer, to rest in peace, to dwell in light, beyond this veil of darkened sight. And I believe she dwells in light, Elaine, the free and fair. Alas, I feared that it was so, the broken king replied. This is the sorrow fathers know, to love her and to let her go, to trust what only God can know, that in her peace she died. But she has borne to you a son, a true knight in both lines. My sight and foresight both grow dim, but we must put our trust in him, and know, above these shadows grim, somewhere the true light shines. Said Lancelot, I share your grief, and now my task is done. And though I briefly glimpsed the Grail, I could not step beyond the veil. Alas, how all my actions fail. But there is one who will prevail, my one and only son. And Lancelot bade them farewell, and turned unto the strand. And there upon the grey sea's marge waited that strange enchanted barge, to take the errant knight in charge, to where sea mists and marshes merge, and back to drier land. Back to the chantry on the green she bore the grieving knight. The sisters gave him succour there, and heard his news so strange and rare, and brought him every comfort there, and rested him the night. And on the morrow brought his steed, and prayed and wished him well. And what became of Lancelot, and how he came to Camelot, another tale must tell. So there you are, we've come to the end of that section. I hope I filled you in a little further, but much more is to be revealed. I hope it'll all come out in a book of some kind next year. Every blessing. Thanks for calling round.